There's not a single issue in the Absolute universe crazier than the newest Absolute Batman. Let's break it down. We have never seen Bruce Wayne tested like this before in any piece of Batman media ever. Not physically, not emotionally, not in any way, shape, or form. And before we get started, make sure to drop a like, comment, and maybe even share this video with somebody, because honestly, not witnessing such a peak issue like this should be considered a crime. With that being said, go grab some food for this video. You're probably gonna need it. So if you guys can't recall, the last issue consisted of Bruce finding and breaking into Arkham to find his best friend Waylon, which actually turned out to be a giant underground city-like facility. But upon putting boots on the ground and trying to figure out what was going down at this place, his investigation was put to a stop after being confronted by Bane, who not only defeated him without using any effort, but eventually used his venom to transform into a giant hulking beast before picking up Bruce's body like a ragdoll and expressing that it was time for surgery. And you'll see later in this issue, he was not joking about the surgery part. Anyways, initially our story picks up in June with Martha expressing how worried she was to Jim Gordon because Bruce had been missing for the last few days. And although Jim tried assuring her that everything was going to be okay, Martha's connection to her son was incredibly strong because she could literally feel that something was wrong. Hey, that kind of rhymed. After that, the story picks up right where we left off with the aftermath of Bane's overwhelming victory. And it's here that we see Bruce isolated in a private prison cell, naked and practically unconscious, while being monitored by a nearby doctor in a secret room. And this doctor takes note of practically every little thing Bruce does throughout the entire issue. But as he laid on the floor, still somewhat sedated, the doctor states that Bruce was so heavy that one of the 6 staff members that it took to carry him to the operating table received a devastating back injury. But they'd soon find out that that was just the beginning of the many road bumps they'd run into, because not only did they have to confiscate a total of 14 hidden weapons from him during the removal of his bat suit, but a plethora of homemade booby traps were triggered that caused even more injuries. Anyways, shortly after that, despite the doctor predicting he'd be unconscious for another 48 hours, Bruce lifted himself off the ground and used a secret pin lodged inside of his mouth to pick the lock on the door to his cell. And it's here that Bruce gets a much clearer idea of how terrible this place was, because while aimlessly running throughout the facility looking for a way to escape, he ran past a human experiment where somebody's body was being modified inside of a giant egg-like pod. And then I'm pretty sure we got our first introduction to Absolute Clayface, because when the doctor finally realized that he wasn't in his cell, she indicated that he was possibly en route to a place called the Clay Biome, which Bruce would soon find out was a bunch of mangled up bodies molded together, expressing that they were experiencing unbearable amounts of pain. Soon enough, Bruce realized he was in trouble though, as all the bodies collectively started latching onto him, completely restricting him from moving, until none other than Bane arrived onto the scene, battering him with so much power that he instantly went unconscious. After that, the story jumps an entire month into the future, where Martha was now more worried than ever, desperately begging Harvey to look further into Bruce's disappearance. But Harvey claimed that the DA office was already doing everything they could to find him. Meanwhile, Bruce was still isolated inside of his cell, and because so much time had passed, he practically had a full beard now. Nevertheless, the doctor proceeded to keep tabs on him and his behavior inside of her study log, stating that it was now day 45, and it seemed like he had finally given up hope and submitted, because in addition to being extremely inactive, he was no longer maintaining his environment and refusing to eat, which forced him to stick a feeding tube inside his stomach. Soon enough though, she realized that her diagnosis was premature and that Bruce was purposely showcasing a broken demeanor to catch the doctors off guard, because the next time they tried sedating him, he rose from the ground, battered one of them in the jaw with a massive leg kick, and then used some makeshift knuckle spikes that were made from his teeth to beat another into submission. And you'd think that that was as brutal as the situation got, but I can assure you that things got even worse, because moments later he revealed that he modified his feeding tube so he could use it to blast his own raw stomach acid. And after shooting it at one of the doctor's faces, he then jammed their head inside his personal toilet. But this wasn't just any toilet, it was a disgusting toilet. Because apparently Bruce had been filling it with guano, peeing on the guano without flushing it for weeks on end, which created a highly flammable compound that he then used to explode one of the walls on his cell, allowing another attempt to escape the Arkham facility, in addition to letting him witness a few more of the abominations that they were working on. However, this time, while running past the giant egg he saw earlier, he noticed it was cracked and there was nothing inside. But unable to ponder on it for too long, he simply kept on running and running until leaping off the the edge of the platform to a different floor inside the facility. After that, we find him arriving to some sort of forest, trying to see if there was anybody around who could help him, but upon taking cover behind one of the trees, he realized that the forest was alive somehow as roots and branches began clinging onto parts of his body. But the nightmare was far from over, because soon enough it's revealed that this is the Isley ecosystem, as in Pamela Isley, otherwise known as Poison Ivy, and soon enough, zombie-like creatures of the green began walking towards him, begging to be let free as he struggled to break through his bonds. However, as soon as one of the creatures began injecting its roots in his mouth and various other body parts, the incident was put to a stop by Bane once again so he could give Bruce another beating before taking him back to his cell. The story then switches things over to a montage flashback back when Bruce was training Waylon for his big fight against Bibbo Bobowski. Knowing how huge of an opportunity this was, the two of them were running every single day, constantly lifting weights and studying Bibbo, and of course working on moves inside the octagon. But then things switched over to a private flashback between Bruce and Selina, where we realized that things weren't going as well as they seemed, because not only was Selina trying to get Bruce to accompany her on a robbery, but after refusing to tag along, Bruce expressed that he didn't actually think Waylon had a chance of winning the fight, but he didn't have the heart to tell him. Nevertheless, our story then advances into August, with Martha still desperately searching for her son. But while trying to hand out missing flyers with his face on them, it seemed as if nobody cared to help her out, which was causing her to lose hope. We then jump back over to Bruce, waking up in his cell completely bald after going through 2 entire weeks worth of surgeries. The 2 most painful surgeries being the craniotomy and the brainstem insertion. As stated by the doctor, the entire staff was really excited because they were confident he was finally going to break. But for some reason, Bane suggested they put him through one last test before deciding he was ready for whatever they were planning, laying out all of Bruce's equipment in his cell in an attempt to draw him out for one last battle. But Bruce was truly struggling and unsure if he wanted to continue fighting, as his cowl hung there from the ceiling, seemingly calling him to rise to the occasion. Eventually, the pressure was too much to bear though, and he couldn't help but take one last shot to show his captors who and what they were dealing with. So he put his armor on before busting through the cell walls once again, but just moments after doing so, he was encountered by another set of experiments desperately begging for his help. Bruce didn't have any idea what he was dealing with though, and probably couldn't help them if he tried. But even if he did try, his efforts wouldn't last long, because soon enough, a juiced up Bane made yet another overwhelming entrance, sending Bruce flying backwards into the air after kicking the upper half of his body, and then clobbering him with a massive right fist as soon as Bruce tried getting off the ground. And unfortunately, Bruce had no way of countering the assault, being victim of another massive blow just moments later, except this time his body went flying backwards again, straight through the glass of the egg experiment chamber. But despite things going terribly wrong, soon enough it's revealed that that chamber was none other than Killer Croc, who we all know is Bruce's friend Waylon. And immediately upon gaining freedom, he instantly started tearing at Bane's face after jumping on his upper torso until using his tail to send him toppling on the ground. But Bane wasn't the only one who would have to pay for their wrongdoings, because when 2 nearby doctors tried evading the scene, Killer Croc ferociously stopped them in their tracks by chomping on both of their bodies before tearing what remained to shreds. After that, Bruce realized that this was his best friend. He couldn't believe what they did to him, and at first it looked as if Waylon didn't recognize who he was and wanted to tear him to shreds, but it was made clear that he did know who he was upon throwing Bruce on his freaking back so he could ride him like a freaking dragon. And I know this is a super sad situation, but I can't help but admit that this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. Anyways, after that it was clear that Bane wasn't finished just yet, getting up from the ground and then quoting Xenophon Corinth, who said, "It's not the strongest or most intelligent who survived the war, but the people who are most adaptive to change." But not caring for what he had to say, Batman then told him to shove it up his bumhole before jumping off the side of the platform and trying to escape into the sewers with Waylon. But as none other than Dr. Arkham herself walked onto the scene, Bane expressed that he was ready for the final phase, stating that he was very excited to truly break Batman. But sadly, that's when this issue comes to an end. Let me know if you guys thought it was as good as I thought it was, and if you want to see what happens next, let me know in the comments down below.